Good evening. My name is Jacob Weeks, and I serve here as the technology director, as well as I serve up at Okoboji Lutheran Bible Camp in several roles, including as a member of the program team up there and their waterfront director. But I realized, although I've been here for about a year and a half now serving Faith, a lot of you I haven't had a chance to really kind of share my story of how I ended up here, and kind of where I am in life. And so when Pastor asked me to speak for this evening, I thought it'd be a really great opportunity to share that, and in the bigger context of kind of my life, the faithfulness that God has continued to show. And every time I kind of start feeling lost and stressed and worried about what's coming next in life, God kind of clearly says, hey, this is the next step. And that's one thing going on in my life right now. So I figured it'd be a kind of great opportunity to share. So that's where Matthew 6, 25 through 34 came from tonight. And it's one of those patterns that keeps showing up, especially in my life since college. I like to often say 1 time's an anomaly, 2 times is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. At 4, I think God's just trying to teach me something. And we're on the 4th time through this kind of pattern in my life. So before I get started on that, the title tonight, Heading plus Time. It's a navigation or dead reckoning, deduced reckoning, we call it in aviation. Basically, you fly a known heading at a known speed for a known time, and you get to a known location. It's how we navigate, especially early in flight training. You can have a map, a compass, and a watch, and you can navigate anywhere you want in the country. You don't need fancy GPS or anything. It's just dead reckoning, heading plus time. And the process works. I've navigated all the way across the country before with nothing but that. And but you have to trust the system for it to work. You have to trust your time. You have to trust that heading, that it's gonna work. And just like that, we trust God in the direction He gives our lives and the timing of all of that. So I'll start with college. So this is going to be about trusting in God's direction and time. So college, I went to Lutheran University. It's down in Texas. It's a small non-denominational school, very heavy on the tech side of things. And I went there specifically to study missionary aviation. For those of you that aren't familiar, missionary aviation basically is pilots and mechanics that step in developing parts of the world where either transportation isn't an option or ground transportation isn't safe, and make the work of missionaries, whether that be expats or nationals, possible. Usually in either extremely remote locations or extremely mountainous locations, often both. So that's what I went to college for. I started as a calling in high school. Growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a pilot. That was kind of the only career choice I ever really had growing up. And when everybody I ever asked what I was going to do, I was going to be a pilot. It was straightforward. But then in high school, God put a calling on my heart to do mission work and not just fly for the airlines or fly for the military, but fly for missionaries, fly for the kingdom. So I specifically went to LeTourneau, was part of their mission program there. While I was there, I also did get to be part of the flight team. That's a picture of our flight team there. And actually several of those people in that picture are serving as missionary pilots around the world right now. In Africa and Papua Indonesia are 2 that I know of from that group of pilots. And while I was at LeTourneau, one of the things that was kind of always on our mind was Matthew 6:33, because it was our university's verse. Obviously, it's on our seal there. And so it was one of those things all the way through school, and it was just kind of all of us students there always had this reminder of serve the kingdom, seek the kingdom, and God's gonna sort the details out. And so that's kind of one of the reminders of when I was thinking about what to talk about tonight. Matthew 6:33 came to mind. And while I was there, I progressed. These are pictures of me receiving most of my certificates from first solo, that top center one. Extremely exciting, the first time you ever leave the ground in a plane by yourself. That was on May 1st of 2013. That is a date that every pilot will always know, was what day they first soloed. And then those are some after some of my other check rides: instrument, commercial multi-engine, commercial single engine, and then receiving my maintenance license. So that was 4 years of training to get ready for the mission field. And then when I graduated, suddenly kind of my routine for the last 4 years was over. I wrapped up in summer of 16. I received my commercial pilot's license. I received my maintenance license, and I was done. And I didn't know what was coming next in life. I didn't know where I was gonna go. I had had a routine for the last 4 years: flight training, classes, labs, and suddenly I didn't have a direction, and I kind of started getting stressed. And so I moved home and spent about 3 months applying to jobs, sending out resumes, making phone calls, sending emails, and nothing seemed to be working. And then suddenly a friend of ours back in Illinois said, "Hey, here's an email address you should email." And it was a friend of his was a mechanic for an airline. And within a couple of weeks, I had a job offer and was moving up to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to work night shift on airliners. When they're not flying for revenue, they're in the hangar getting worked on. And that's what I did. And it was just all of this stress, everything I had been trying to figure out what was next in life, and suddenly just, hey, here's what's next. And it just made sense, and I followed God to Milwaukee. And I didn't know how long I was gonna be there, but I knew that's the direction I had been given. I didn't know the time yet, but I knew the direction. So I moved up there, had some amazing experiences, worked with a group of interesting people up there. There was another alum from our school that I got to work with there, and learned a lot. But after only about a year there, it kind of started being clear of it's time to move on. Just kind of the feeling of I was here for a season, this is where God sent me, but now it's time to go. But I didn't know where I was going again. And so again, I kind of got a little stressed out and nervous. And then suddenly a phone call from a classmate of mine at LeTourneau, and I was on my way moving to Orange City, Iowa, to help build that airplane. That's an Angel. It's an aircraft specifically designed for mission work by a former missionary pilot, and to help build that airplane and work on some of the certification for it with the FAA. And it was one of those things, again, out of the blue, it just showed up, and it made sense of, okay, this is the next direction God sent me on in my life. And there, got a lot of really good experience on small airplanes, a lot of sheet metal fabrication experience, and lived there for about 4.5 years. And coming to spring of 22, it kind of got to the point again in my life where it was kind of obvious God was starting to urge me on to whatever the next thing was. And again, I didn't know what that next thing was gonna be. So I start looking, and this time I had plans. I was talking to people looking for pilot jobs or other maintenance positions, and suddenly I get a phone call from camp, out of the blue. And it was Dan asking me to come back to camp to help for a summer. They were dealing with a transition to a new director at Ingham, and they wanted a few staff members with experience to kind of be there. So I said, well, that makes sense. I think that's God's calling me for the summer. I'll come for a summer, and then I'll move on to wherever goes next. So I found myself back at camp for a summer, and that summer then morphed into 2 years. As by about midway through that summer, it was very clear that God said, no, this isn't just for a summer. This season is gonna be more. It's gonna be for a year, and then it became 2 years of getting to serve here at Faith and serving at camp. And both of those experiences have been amazing. I've met some amazing people, gotten to work with great people, and see firsthand ministry for the first time since I was in college. I'd been working in aviation, but I hadn't gotten into the ministry side of missions. And so God called me in that direction for a season. But now I find myself in the same position I found myself before, where it's time to move on. And that's tough. It's always hard to move on and figure out what the next step is going to be. And if you would have asked me where I was going at the end of August when I'm done with camp 3 weeks ago, I would have probably answered with a very stressed response and nervous because I had no idea. But once again, God was there and God had a plan. And I still don't know where I'm going, but possibilities have shown up. Where 2 weeks ago, I walked into an office over at the Spencer Airport asking the flight instructor about doing a flight review. Every 2 years, you're required to fly with a flight instructor, according to the FAA. And so I walked into the airport asking about arranging that and getting that done. And I walked out with having them ask for my resume. And then, so I gave that to them. And while I was in Montana, I got a phone call asking when I could start. They were a little disappointed when I said I'm busy through August. But that's a possibility. But also, while I was in Montana, I ran into a college classmate of mine who was also a missions major at LeTourneau. And we caught up, and in that conversation, he asked if I wanted to join and help him run a new missions training program. He's starting out there. So if you ask me where I'm going next in life, I still don't know. But I see God's continued faithfulness in my life every time that a transition has come. The next step becomes clear at the time I need to know what it is. And it just reminds me so much of the passage from Matthew that we read tonight of don't worry. The animals don't worry. God feeds them. God provides shelter for them. And it's just so clearly shown in my life through this journey, through working towards the mission field, getting maintenance experience, getting flight experience, of whenever the next step needs to happen, God's direction and God's timing shows up. And so that brings us back to heading and time. You fly the heading you've been given by God for the time you've been given to fly it. And you get to where God's taking you. Thanks.